Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Let's Talk Policy. I'm an independent journalist, your host for this conversation series, Smita Sharma. I'm also visiting faculty at the Kautilya School of Public Policy in Hyderabad. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he wrapped up his state visit to the United States recently. The 3-day visit we saw, which was actually his first state visit in 9 years, it included at least 3 meetings with President Joe Biden. There was a private dinner at the White House, a lunch at the State Department, an address to the members of the US Congress joint session. Prime Minister Modi also became the only Indian to address the US Congress twice. Now, the sweeping broad 58-paragraph India-US joint statement that was released afterwards, it has several key pillars. Technology partnership, which has 8 key elements, including strengthening semiconductor supply chains, critical minerals partnership, advanced telecommunications. There is a NASA-ISRO collaboration in space, the Artemis Accord, quantum, advanced computing. There is AI, innovation handshake, also the earlier announced the initiative on critical emerging technologies, or ISET. Then, of course, there is the crucial defense element partnership, co-production, sensitive technology transfer agreements. On the broader people-to-people side, the US intends to open new consulates in Bengaluru, in Ahmedabad. India has said that it looks forward to opening its consulate in Seattle later this year and to announcing 2 new consulates in the US in the near future. The US also last year issued a record 125,000 visas to Indian students. And Indians are actually on track now to becoming the largest foreign student community in the US. There has been a 20% increase compared to last year. So clearly, the India-US relationship has come a long, long way since the Nehru-Truman meeting in 1949, which happened at the backdrop of the end of the Cold War too. And in the current times, when we see through the ups and downs and then a strong bipartisan support, how should we look at the state of play today between these 2 countries? One, of course, the world's superpower, and the other, a rising emerging power in Asia. That's in fact what we are going to discuss in Let's Talk Policy here. And joining me are 2 very, very important voices when it comes to strategic thinking in India and the US. Ambassador Navtej Sarna, he's a retired career diplomat. He has served as India's ambassador to the United States, to Israel, former High Commissioner to the UK. He's an acclaimed author and also an advisory board member for the Kautilya School of Public Policy. Thank you so much, Ambassador Sarna, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Smita.
I also have with me, joining in early from Washington, D.C., Lisa Curtis. She's a senior fellow and director of the Indo-Pacific Security Program at CNS, which is the Center for New American Society in Delhi. She has held important positions at the US National Security Council, CIA, State Department, Capitol Hill in the past. She also served as the Deputy Assistant to the President and NSC Senior Director for South and Central Asia from 2017 to 2021 under 3 successive national security advisors. Lisa, thank you so much for joining in on Let's Talk Policy.
Thank you for inviting me here, Smita. It's great to see you. Great to be here.
And I would like to, in fact, welcome all those who are tuning into this conversation. To our attendees, you can put in your questions into the chat box. I will also allow some of you to ask questions directly as we progress into the conversation. Let me start by asking you, Ambassador Sarna, because Ashley Ellis, again, a prominent strategic voice, in an interview to the Hindustan Times after the Modi visit, he was asked whether this is a transformational visit. And he replied, and I'm quoting him, Richard Nixon's 1972 visit to China set the benchmark on this count. In the post-Cold War period, I would say there was only such transformational encounter in US-India relations. PM Manmohan Singh's visit to Washington in 2005, with possibly Bill Clinton's 2000 and George W. Bush's 2006 visits to India as debatable runners-up. Your thoughts on how significant did you find this visit? How different did you find the visit? And did you find it transformational?
Thank you, Smita. Thank you for having me here. I think, let me say, I don't want to rank visits, but this was a very important visit. And Ashley is right in the sense that there are certain visits which sort of change the level of engagement and are not just business as usual being continued. And it is correct that the 2005 visit, which opened the doors to the nuclear deal. I mean, it took us some time to negotiate the rest of it, but that was the beginning. Did change the level of engagement. And certainly Prime Minister Modi's visit last month has been one in which the level of engagement has hopefully been irretrievably changed. And it is, in that sense, yes, it is a transformational visit, because you have gone from putting up building blocks one after the other, as has been done over the last 20 years, into now putting those building blocks together and saying, okay, now the relationship has moved on top of these building blocks and we have to go somewhere else. So absolutely correct in that sense that this has been a very important, call it transformational, call it a defining visit, call it a visit which actually brings the two countries together, not in engagement, not in a kind of one-off deals, not in a transactional sense, but actually this is the beginning of the tying up of a certain common paradigm. Because once you have laid this level of engagement, as the joint statement does, and I presume that all of it or most of it will be implemented in due course. Once you have that implementation, it is a big if. Once you have that implementation, you would have tied in on a technological paradigms, on defense paradigms, which will be difficult to disengage. So in that sense, this is a new level of engagement.
I think just to clarify, Ashley seemed to suggest that this cannot be counted as transformational yet, that only time will tell, because that's the list of the transformational visits that he cited, from the Nixon China visit to, of course, Manmohan Singh and the Bush and Bill Clinton incoming visit to India. Eliza, your thoughts to begin with on how do you see what played out during Prime Minister Modi's state visit?
Well, I would say it was an exceptionally significant visit because of the defense and technology breakthroughs that were made, the fact that the U.S. Has agreed to joint production, co-production of jet engine technology. Really, the significance of that agreement cannot be overstated. As Ambassador Sarna has said, this has set a new benchmark, really, for U.S.-India defense cooperation. And then on the technology front, we have elevated that technology dialogue and cooperation between the two countries. The Micron investment in India shows confidence that India will play an important role in the supply chains for semiconductors, which is very significant. So I would say that we saw breakthroughs in this visit, also very symbolically important, as you mentioned. Only the second time for an Indian leader to address a joint session of Congress. Several high-profile meetings at the State Department, the tech handshake meeting. This really, broke new ground, I believe, for the U.S.-India relationship. And I think it's also significant because it comes at a time where the U.S. and India have major disagreements over Russia and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So I think what this visit did was it showed the strength and resilience of the U.S.-India partnership, and how it can weather some very significant differences between the two countries. But I think I have to agree with Ashley that I wouldn't call it, as transformational as the U.S.-India civil nuclear deal. That was definitely transformational. So even though it's extremely important, extremely significant visit, I think I would have to agree with Ashley that it's not as transformational as that initial breakthrough of the U.S. agreeing to provide civilian nuclear technology to India, and what that symbolized for the difference in the relationship. But certainly an important visit, one that will have knock-on effects for a long time to come, and some really important steps, particularly on technology and defense.
Ambassador Sarna, what do you think has really changed about this relationship, the dynamics in the past 2 decades? The one thing that you would like to say has been the defining change?
Well, it's, when you have such a wide-ranging relationship, Smita, it's facile to really attribute it to one thing. And I wouldn't like to attribute it to one thing, but I agree with you absolutely that it's now, I always place sort of the cutoff point at 1998, which was India's nuclear tests, when really the United States, after despite the fact that the Cold War had ended a few years ago, that was the time that the United States actually woke up to India's concerns. It woke up in anger, actually, and then it took some time for us to tell the India story and get into that engagement. So I think it's been a number of things. It's been the fact that India, despite having become a nuclear weapon state, has acted extremely responsibly in that respect. India has shown capabilities which has earned it the trust to slowly begin to get into a closer relationship with the United States on technology and defense. And we have moved significantly from our own positions in that regard, particularly in the defense. At the same time, there's been India's growing economic power, which has both been an attraction to the United States and other major economic players in that sense. And there has been, what we put as people to people, or call it whatever, India's increased IT prowess, India's increased professionals in the United States, the success of the diaspora, all that has formed links. Along with that are certain factors which are completely beyond this relationship, but impact on the relationship. For instance, the United States also started warming up to India in the early 2000s with the George W. Era and Condi Rice, when they saw India as a possible player to rebalance the configuration in the face of a growing China. And at that time, China was nowhere what it is today. But that was another factor which came into play. And in the last few years, this factor has become a very significant factor, not the only factor, but again, a very significant factor in which has brought together a strategic convergence. The growing importance of the Indo-Pacific for the United States, and consequently of the Indian Ocean. And that, a lot of this has played into each other. So I would say, broadly speaking, there are the bilateral aspects, which we have talked about. India's growing power, India's growing possibilities as an economic power, India's credentials as a responsible player in the Indo-Pacific, and the strategic convergences that have come about because of the changing relationship with China, both for the United States as well as for us.
And these strategic convergences will always remain at a point where India and US will remain close partners, close friends, and not allies, Ambassador Sarna?
These things are not static, Smita, as you well know. And if you go back into the history of the India-US relationship, you mentioned the Truman-China meeting. I mean, one of the major things was Truman thought that Pandit Nehru was a communist and that he was far too lenient towards China and not taking a hardline view. And through the 50s and the 60s, whenever we tended to agree on China, our bilateral relationship blossomed, or at least improved. And when we tended to disagree, as we did in certainly the first half of the 50s, the relationship tanked. So these things are not static. And I think we have to watch this ball. Even today, the decoupling has changed to de-risking. There have been so many visits from the United States to China. I don't say that this means that the US-China problem is going away. It's a way of a better management of the relationship. And, relationships keep on moving. So I think the international relations not being a sort of zero-sum game, it doesn't mean that if you talk to so-and-so, you can't talk to me. But at the same time, they do impact each other. So
Lisa,
I think it's something which we have to constantly play with.
Lisa, Ambassador Sarna made some important points, but keeping in mind that that important strategic convergence over China and also the deepening economic engagement as one of the key factors, how much will the state of play between US and China? I mean, at some point in time, perhaps there will be a reset of ties. They're still when it comes to trading, of course, there are no two partners like the US and the China. So when that reset, if that happens again, will that impact, say, for instance, the relations with India, the balance in the Indo-Pacific? How does that play out from here?
Well, I don't think I foresee a reset of US-China relations. I think, what we have seen in terms of the new steps toward China, the steps to restrict their access to semiconductor technology, that was quite a big step that was made last October by the Biden administration. Steps by the Trump administration to limit Huawei and its access to technology. So there have been major changes in the US-China relationship, I would say, over the last 3-4 years that really preclude any type of genuine reset of the relations. Now, I think what we will see, and what we saw with Secretary Blinken's visit, Janet Yellen's engagements, is, and probably we'll see an engagement between the leaders, presumably at the APEC summit in November in the United States. That's an effort to put a floor to the sort of tensions in the relationship, to not allow the competition between the two countries to escalate to conflict. Certainly neither side is interested in any kind of conflict, but I think that what we can see is the relationship will be characterized by this very sharp competition, economic, military, even political competition for a long time to come. So I don't think that we're going to see any, real qualitative difference in the US-China relationship with regard to the competition. But I think, it's interesting. I believe that India has also had a change in its relationship with China, a sort of watershed moment with the 2020 border crisis that, of course, resulted in the first loss of life along their disputed borders in several decades. And I think that is shaping India's really strategic view of China as well. And, whereas, of course, India and China will find ways to engage, their trade has also increased in recent years, despite that major, dust up in relations. But I still believe that that will really provide the overall framing reference for India as it moves forward with its relationship with China. So I think, we're in a different ballgame than we were in 10 years ago. And I think it does provide opportunities for greater US-India cooperation. It does drive some of this, defense and technology cooperation between the two sides. But it also is not the only factor that is driving closer US-India relations. I think there is still converging broader strategic interest and just a desire to see a free, open Indo-Pacific where, no one power dominates that region. So I think that, whereas Ambassador Sarna is right that we see evolving relationships, and, we're not talking about decoupling, we're talking about de-risking, and you're going to continue to see diplomatic overtures to China from the United States. But I don't foresee any major reset or change in that in the broad trajectory of the U.S.-China relationship.
That's a very interesting crystal gaze. But coming to the subject of relations with China, and I want both of you to weigh in on this, starting with you, Lisa, because on China, you said not decoupling, de-risking is what we are going to see moving forward. But on Russia, the divergences are deep. They are being managed. But does it have the potential of becoming a sticking point in the Indo-US bilateral ties in the near future?
Well, I think it is a point of tension for sure. But I think what the Biden administration is signaling that they see China as the greater long-term challenge, and they see India's role in establishing a free and open Indo-Pacific as critically important. And so that is sort of the priority when it comes to the US-India relationship. But that doesn't mean that there aren't, people within the administration who are frustrated with India's position of neutrality toward Russia, and also, some concerns about India's continued reliance on Russian military gear. I think those concerns still linger within the administration. But as Eli Ratner, the Assistant Secretary of Defense, has said, is that there was some China broken, to use a pun there, within the administration to move forward with this agreement to co-produce jet engine technology. It wasn't a decision that was come to easily within the US administration. And part of the reason that it didn't come easily is because of the concerns of India's continued reliance on Russian military technology. So I think, the play or the hope is that as the US expands the technology, sophisticated technology that it's willing to transfer and open up with India and co-produce, that will eventually drive India to reduce its dependence on Russia. But nobody knows that will actually happen. But I think that's the goal, that's the aim. And from India's perspective, I think that it has to consider what kind of partner Russia's going to be after this war in Ukraine. Russia's economy, its military will suffer from sanctions, from this isolation. We've already seen, some tension within the Russian system with Prigozhin and what happened there. So I think, it would be in India's interest to really consider carefully whether Russia will indeed be a reliable partner for India in the future.
Navtej Sarna, in the diplomatic galleries, do you see this question being asked often? Of course, our dependency on Russia, even for imports of, military equipment, has reduced a lot. There is already a lot of defense buying that is happening from Israel, from France, from US. Do you see this question coming up in the diplomatic galleries and conversations in terms of the reliability on Russia in the long term?
For me, Smita?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yes, I think I agree with the points made by Lisa. The point is, honestly, that we've taken a certain position on the Ukraine conflict, and we've taken a certain position on Russia, which has been well explained to our interlocutors. And for the moment, it seems to have been discounted and bought, as we saw in this relationship. Not because everybody likes it, but because, as Jake Sullivan said, the US would rather play the longer game with India. And quite clearly, I would say, without having been anywhere near the galleries that you talk about, I would say that certainly in Washington, one of the major reasons for allowing this transfer of technology would have been the argument that, listen, if we want to wean away India from Russia, then we have to give them what they're asking for. because we didn't just have this relationship with Russia as a given from day one. We went to the Soviet Union for a lot of things because we were not getting them from other sources, or we were getting them with too many strings attached. So then, therefore, India had to, build up its own security. And now there is a problem of legacy weapon systems which need to be serviced, maintained, spares have to be given. It's an open question as to how much Russia will be able to support that supply line if and when this conflict ends. So that, we also need to diversify. So it's not, again, it's not just India is not being forced to diversify, but India has been wanting to diversify also. And as you rightly said, we moved on with Israel, with France, and others, and with the United States. I mean, we have today, if you count the Predator deal as and when it finally is finalized, you have $23 billion of purchases. And just 15 years ago, you had zero. So, you have moved on. We are flying several US aircraft as part of our defense services, particularly in the maritime reconnaissance and the transport aircraft. And therefore, again, this will be something which will be a major factor in the relationship, because we can only diversify if we can diversify on mutually agreeable terms. And this has not happened overnight. We built up this trust through signing of the foundational agreements. We built up this trust through gradually but definitely intensifying our defense exercises over the last several years. So all that has given interoperability a real meaning. It's given teeth to being a major defense partner of the United States. So therefore, this is a process. If this happens, then there will always be voices in a country as large as the United States who will not agree with everybody's position all the time. As there are voices in India. You saw the big debate we had domestically in India when we were going in for the nuclear deal. And so again, so there will be problems. These voices will be more strident when there is a crisis situation. And then there will have to be a certain amount of balancing, a certain amount of explaining, a certain amount of diplomatic engagement to adjust to mutually acceptable positions.
Right. Let me just also remind our participants in the room here, if any of you has a question, please feel free to use the raise hand emoji and I can, allow you to unmute and ask your questions directly. But just to clarify, because we are talking about technology transfer, Ambassador Sarna, and you did use the phrase too many strings attached. But in the case of the US, when we are talking about, the next generation defense partnership, co-producing GE's F414 combat aircraft engines, will it be coming without any strings attached? Will conditions be acceptable to India? Because why I ask this is we have seen these previous attempts of jet engine tech transfer 2010 to 2019 under the DTTI framework, but that really didn't yield results. So how is it different now?
Well, I think it's an evolution. In DTTI, I think, again, it just didn't have the necessary impetus. It just didn't have the necessary mutual understanding on the sort of whole of the system approach on both sides. You must realize that both India and the United States are very complicated bureaucracies. And there are several, what the Americans call it, the interagency process is actually played out in India also. At a very deep level. So, we just were not on, DTTI is not finished, so I shouldn't sound its death knell, but I think we were just simply not on the same wavelength. Hopefully with this decision, that bridge may have been crossed in the sense that it has been agreed to transfer technology. I do not know the fine print, so I can't say what are the conditions, etc., etc. This will all play out in the implementation.
Lisa,
if I could just add real quickly to that, because I think another difference from a couple of years ago, or when they were trying to do this through the DTTI, is there's even greater bipartisan congressional support for moving forward with this kind of defense co-production. I had heard that the congressional notification that the administration is required to do to move this forward got approval in record time, like, more quickly than any other congressional notification in history. So I think that that's also part of it. There is very strong bipartisan support for moving in this direction of enhancing our co-production on defense technologies with India.
But, just a quick follow-up to the question, Lisa, because you are in DC and you've been having these conversations with, of course, serving and retired officials. Is there clarity on how much of a technology transfer are we really looking at? And what are going to be the main hurdles? Because they will still need some congressional clearances, a couple of ratifications as well.
Well, again, I would say that the initial take on this was that Congress moved very quickly on, the first congressional notification on this jet engine co-production deal. So I think the initial signs are pretty good for this moving forward. That's not to say that, we have so many congressional members that can, possibly throw a wrench into something like this. It only takes, one or two to try to slow things down or delay things. But, in broad strokes, the bipartisan support for moving forward with India is there. And I think, that is a major difference from a couple of years ago. I'll bring up the S-400 because a couple of years ago, there were a lot of questions about, what impact would India's acquisition of Russia's S-400 missile defense systems have, and would they face any kind of sanctions? You don't really hear anybody in the U.S. Congress talking about this anymore. So I think there has been some kind of shift within the U.S. Congress on India, and a real recognition of India's critical importance for the United States and in the challenges that we're facing, particularly with regard to China.
Okay, just the last set of questions, Ambassador Sarna, because what I'm picking up from both of you, it does look like that we have made greater progress when it comes to technology cooperation, because while we did call that civilian nuclear agreement a transformational stage in relations, a momentous step in relations, it's been 8 years and counting. We still actually don't have a techno-commercial offer on nuclear cooperation, which of course is also partly because of India's own, the domestic liability laws that became contentious. Here you do see that things will move faster when it comes to the actual co-production of these jet engines.
Well, I think, Smita, we again have to put this into perspective. We may not have moved on to greater production of civil nuclear energy and setting up reactors because of certain other reasons. But what the nuclear deal did do was end India's nuclear apartheid. And that means also high-tech apartheid. We then became members of the regimes which were actually set up to keep us out. Except for the NSG, now we are part of the entire set of regimes, which allow us, and because of that nuclear deal, we may not have got American reactors, but we certainly got, uranium from Kazakhstan, we got reactors from Russia, we got reactors from France, we got, and even with the United States, Lisa can probably throw light on this better, but it's my instinctive feeling that we would have not been able to go into the foundational agreements and the actual transfer of technology if a lot of barriers had not been cleared. And, so these are, again, may not have direct consequences, but yes, they all lead onto other things. So I don't know.
They laid the solid foundation. I think that's important. I have a question here in the chat box for you from Athira, who wants to know that obviously China is a factor in India-US relations, but is it an enmity between the US and Russia that defines its relationship with India? And what could be the further points of convergence that could motivate both sides to build a more robust relationship?
No, if I understand the question right, I mean, the US and Russia and its predecessor, the Soviet Union, have been traditional adversaries ever since the end of the Second World War. But India has had a strong relationship with the Soviet Union, but again, not without patches, and also a patchy relationship with the US for the first 50 years, and then an increasingly strong relationship. So I think that is an axis which has been managed so far. And yes, now when it's always difficult when US and Russian relations plummet, then our strategic maneuvering space becomes tighter. And that's exactly what has happened ever since, this whole, as Lisa pointed out, this S-400 was such a big deal. The CAATSA sanctions looming overhead was such a big deal. And we, people had to work really hard to get an exception into CAATSA, a general exception, not yet an India-specific exception. So because that tightens our strategic space between. If that relationship improves, and at the moment I don't see any signs of it improving, then certainly it moves us, it allows us to deal with both with a greater level of comfort. So it's a tight place, the strategic autonomy that we talk about. It's a tight place. And you have to constantly keep sure that you don't get behind the wet paint.
And India is, of course, very unique when it comes to all these strategic tightrope walkings between very, very hostile countries. Lisa, on that second part of the question, which also leads me into the space collaboration, the Artemis Accord that we're talking about. During the recent Chandrayaan-3 launch, we saw the entire focus, that the world watching, NASA watching, and India's space program for the longest has been associated with the Russians. How do you see space redefining the ties and the space collaborations? How significant are they moving forward?
Great, thank you. First, let me just add something to Ambassador Sarna's remarks on the tight space that India has when US-Russian relations go downhill as they have over the last year and a half. I think that also impacts India in ways like we will see probably at the G20. India has this unique opportunity. It's president of the G20. There are so many things that India can lead on. India wants to play that role of bridging the North and the South and really representing developing countries and their challenges that they're facing. And I think it will do all that, but the chances for, an outcome statement are very low because of the differences between the US and Russia. So it does have an impact, I think, on India and what it's trying to do. But with regard to space, it's really significant. India signing the Artemis Accords, and all the things that they're talking about in terms of working together on human space flight, and just all the interactions that are happening between NASA and ISRO. I think that, this is really significant. There's India opening up the space sector to the commercial sector also provides a lot of opportunities. So I think, we're going to see a lot more cooperation on that front. And it is interesting because, as you said, historically, it's been, the Russians that have been assisting India in the space sector. So the fact that now we're seeing all this new cooperation between the US and India is quite significant and hopefully is, a harbinger of things to come. I know when I was at the NSC, in India's ASAT test had happened. This was a couple of years ago, and there was, a lot of questions, and it was no secret that the head of NASA was very concerned about this, and the impact of the space debris on astronauts. But again, the US and India were able to kind of forge ahead and move ahead with their cooperation, seeing the long-term, the broader context of the importance of working together, and also, recognizing that India is an emerging country with, strong technology, strong defense sector, and, will naturally be playing a greater role on all these fronts. And the US welcomes that. The US wants to see India have the capabilities that it needs, that it is developing. And so again, I see that, as a major change, wanting to see India expand its capabilities, and wanting to see India play its rightful role in, protecting the stability, security of the broader Indo-Pacific region. It can only do that if it has these advanced capabilities. And I think the US, accepts that and acknowledges that.
But these advanced capabilities that Lisa is talking about, Ambassador Sarna, will they also depend on a whole set of domestic factors, on the economic trajectory, on the way of the social fabric, where it's going. Of course, between India and US now, you see these statements that we are not going to publicly chide each other on human rights, on issues of minorities, that these are conversations that happen between top leaders in closed doors. Sure enough, there are problems within the US too, but they also have strong institutions. Will these be important for India to be able to punch above its weight in the days to come?
Well, India has to. Obviously, when India moves ahead, it moves ahead as all of India and all different aspects of India. But certainly, in when we're looking at international cooperation, and we are looking at building our capabilities, we need to get. And in this extremely competitive and technology complex world, we need to get to the best sources. We need to get to the cutting edge of technologies. And there's only the United States which has the whole panoply of technologies available. And if we want to strengthen our security, for instance, if we want to strengthen our developmental activities, for instance, if we want to get the best investment, and if we actually want to plug into, as we certainly see this opportunity of plug into replacing China, if not fully, at least in part, as at high value supply chains in global supply chains. So for all that, I think this relationship and different, that's why you have a 58 para joint statement, and it can't be done. It can't be done in less. How you engage over so many different issues. So yes, I think we have to move in all sorts of things, and you simply can't move in space and not worry about climate change. You can't simply move on food and not worry about defense industry. So I think in this very complex world, moving ahead as a country, becoming the third largest economy in the world, has huge challenges. It's not a cakewalk, but hopefully we are on the way.
Okay, just to end this conversation with, and I want both of you to just leave some food for thought for our young scholars. Is this a Cold War 2.0 era? Is this truly a multipolar world? Of course, we are talking about multipolarity, given the sharp difference when it really comes to the economic sizes. You have the US out there, then a China, and then the differences between the others is so huge. Are we really looking at a multipolar world? Is it a Cold War 2.0, which is playing out in the Indo-Pacific in particular? Ambassador Sarna?
Well, I don't think it's yet a multipolar world. It's not Cold War if you understand Cold War like it was. So it's, again, facile to call it Cold War 2.0, but it's certainly a period of extreme flux of geopolitical rivalry in which at the moment there is one superpower and one extremely fast and aggressive rising power. So in that sense, you can call it, people have tried to call it different names because you can't really take it back to the US Soviet Union era. So people call it cold coexistence, they call it conflictual coexistence, all sorts of things. But yes, if you're seeing it for the foreseeable future, you are going to have the United States and China in deep competition in every which way. But what you're not going to have, what you had in the old Cold War, what you're not going to have is a huge ideological divide. You're not going to have a complete divorce in dependencies, and hopefully you're not going to have two blocks of countries with an iron curtain running through them.
Okay, Lisa, your concluding remarks on these subjects?
Yeah, I think that we're looking at neither a multipolar world yet, nor Cold War 2.0, as Ambassador Sarna says. But we are looking at this new world of sort of extreme competition between the US and China that will impact the rest of the world. There's no getting around that. With Russia, I think the major concern there is if Russia and China see it in their interest to increase their collaboration in order to undermine the rules-based order that's been in place since the end of World War II. And I think that should be the major concern of every other country, including India. So, India has been supportive of this idea of a multipolar world order. I think, India wants to have its strategic options open, preserve good relations with both the US and Russia. I think that's going to be increasingly difficult as we move forward into this new era where we see a Russia that is willing to upend the rules-based order and invade, other countries, at the same time seeking to develop closer relations with China. And, the Europeans are sufficiently alarmed by what Russia has done. It has also concerned them about what could happen in the Indo-Pacific region with Taiwan, China vis-a-vis Taiwan, and that has impacted their own policies. So, I think it's an interesting time for India to consider what multipolarity means and whether it really is in India's interest, because that might mean Russia-China collaboration and greater ability to undermine that rules-based order that we've all benefited from since the end of World War II.
Okay, I think that's a good way of ending this conversation with not a multipolar world, not a Cold War 2.0, but definitely a lot of geopolitical rivalry, as Ambassador Sarna mentions. And at the same time, as Lisa drives home the point that while there's not going to be a likely reset of ties between US and China, but perhaps when it comes to the US-India relations, the Russian shadow does continue, and we'll have to wait and watch as to till what time, does in near future, does US continue to be patient with the India-Russia relationships on the other side. Thank you so much, Ambassador Navtej Sarna, joining me in this on this conversation, and Lisa Curtis from Washington, DC, as well as to the participants who tuned in to this edition of Let's Talk Policy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.